Counting calories is a pain, but here's good news. You don't have to count calories and you can still lose weight. In this video, I'm going to show you how. So back in 2015, I embarked on a journey where I lost 80 pounds. And for part of that time in 2015, I did count calories, but it drove me crazy. I hated it. I was having to weigh and measure everything, and I became very resentful. I remember one particular night, my family was sitting down to a nice meal of tacos, and everybody else was just putting sour cream and cheese on their things and enjoying life. And I was in the kitchen weighing out my little quarter cup of cheddar cheese. And that's when I just decided I'd had enough. I was never going to count calories again, and I decided I would just have to figure it out. So for the next 6 weeks, I ran a little experiment. I counted no calories at all. I weighed and measured nothing. I didn't track any of my food intake. And as it turned out, I was able to lose slightly faster, although in practicality, it was at the same rate. And let me tell you, I felt so much more free when I was not counting calories at all. Now, you might be thinking, if you've watched any of my other videos, that this is a little bit odd. I love to track. I weigh myself every day and I keep track of my 7-day average. So why wouldn't I want to track my calories? And there are a few reasons for that. A lot of the foods that I like to eat don't have a nutrition label. I like to get in the kitchen and cook. And when I cook, a lot of times I'm not even using a recipe. I just pour heavy cream into a sauce until it turns the right color. I do the same thing with my half and half of my coffee. And when you go out to a restaurant or if someone else does the cooking, you have no idea how much of every ingredient went into the thing. At best, you're playing a guessing game. Not to mention, it's kind of a pain to, after you've eaten a meal, to sit down and write down how much of each thing you had. And then on the other side of things, it's hard to know exactly how much you're burning on a day-to-day basis. Your activity level may be high one day and low the next. How do you really know how many calories you're burning? You don't. But at the end of the day, it is exceedingly important to be in a caloric deficit. If you're not in a caloric deficit, then you will not lose weight. So back in 2015, when I had that moment where I said, I'm not going to count calories anymore, I kind of had to figure out, well, what do I do instead? And my idea was, you know what? Our bodies let us know when we're full. Like it's going to tell me, when I'm actually hungry, when I actually need food, and when I've had enough. So I went about the business of trying to learn my body's cues. Now, this is easier said than done because I was in the habit of eating really fast and also eating in a very distracted manner. A lot of times I had the TV on or I was scrolling through Facebook and I just wasn't paying attention to how much I was eating and how I was feeling during the meal. But once I started to pay attention, I started to realize that a lot of times when I left the table, I felt uncomfortably full. I was eating too much. So what I had to learn to do was to pay attention as I was eating to whether I was feeling full or not. And then, most importantly, and it was also the most difficult part, was to, once I realized I had had enough food, to stop eating. Now, this is a thing that just takes a lot of practice, and I'm still not perfect at it. There are plenty of times when I'm eating and I know, I've had enough, but I still take 1 or 2 more bites. But in my experience, if you pay attention to that little voice inside of you that says, okay, you've had enough, and then you just obey it, you're going to end up eating the right amount. Now, another thing that I did that I found very helpful was to pay attention to how full I was feeling after my meals. So in other words, okay, once I stand up from the table, how do I feel? On a scale of 1 to 10, do I feel absolutely stuffed? I feel sick to my stomach, or do I feel still really hungry? And I wanted to be somewhere in the middle of that. I wanted to feel good and full, but not overly so. And then I wanted to feel a little bit of hunger during the day before my meals. Because that's really the key. Your body has built-in mechanisms that will let it know, okay, you've burned through everything you've taken in, and so now it's time to eat. Now, this can get a little tricky though, because sometimes you're going to feel things that feel like hunger that are actually not hunger. It's actually, your body's just cueing you to eat because that's your habit or because you're upset about something and it's just trying to comfort you. I've got a whole video about how to deal with hunger, but just know that there is true hunger and then there's fake hunger, and you have to learn the difference between the two. But that can be tricky, and it takes a lot of time and trial and error to figure that out. Luckily, there is a foolproof method that will show you that you are in a caloric deficit or you're not. And that is your bathroom scale. If you are getting yourself into a caloric deficit on a consistent basis, then over time, the scale will trend down. Now, here's the thing. Weight loss is slow. Sustainable weight loss for even someone who's obese, it's about 1 pound a week. And if you're near a normal BMI, it's fractions of 1 pound a week. And then when you add into that the fact that your water weight is going to fluctuate by a few pounds over the course of a week or so, you just have to learn how to hang in there and stick with things, even if the results are not showing up on the scale right away. So yes, this does mean that there's, a little bit of guessing that goes along with all of this. But over, say, 6 weeks of time of being consistent and feeling, some hunger during the day and not feeling overly full after your meals, you should start to see your numbers trend downwards. So here's the mistake that you're going to want to avoid once you start to see those numbers going down. You may think that it's a good idea to increase your deficit. So in other words, okay, I need to eat less, and then that way the scale is going to move faster. But don't do that. Instead, you want to find and stay in the sweet spot. So yes, it's true. You want to be seeing progress that is quick enough so that you are making progress downwards. But if you increase the deficit too much, then negative effects are going to start happening. Number one, the hunger is going to feel unbearable. You're going to feel hungry, probably hangry, and you're going to be miserable and probably make everyone around you miserable. Number two, your sleep's going to suffer. If you find yourself not being able to fall asleep or having fitful sleep or just waking up and feeling exhausted. Or number three, you're feeling lethargic. You just don't have good energy. Maybe you wake up in the morning and you just don't feel like going for a walk or doing anything other than laying around. So if you find yourself experiencing any of those symptoms, the answer is to eat more food. And I know that sounds counterintuitive when you're trying to lose weight, but the main idea here is you want everything to be sustainable. Things that feel sustainable, you can keep doing them for a long period of time. For a lot of people, you're talking about a weight loss journey that's going to take a year or more. And so you need to think about what can you really stick with for the long term. Here's my recommendation. When you're forming your weight loss plan, do it with enjoyment in mind. Figure out those things that are really going to be sustainable. Make changes that you are willing to implement permanently in your life. And if you'd like some help with that, why don't you check out my workbook that is the companion to the Laid Back Guide to Intermittent Fasting. In this, I give you some real practical tips on how to form your plan. I have a whole section on how to interpret the scale correctly so that you don't quit on your plan, but that you also make tweaks when they're necessary. You can get your copy on Amazon today. So I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.